Hello and welcome to the launch for the Garter Gusset Tea project. My name is Leanne McGregor and I'm glad to have you join me. What I want to do right now is just review the pattern a little bit and talk about the next steps. There are two types of knitting for this project. We have the hand knitters and the LK150 knitters. So first, I'm going to address the hand knitting side of it, and then I'll talk to the LK150 knitters or the Ultimate Sweater Machine knitters, depending on what your choice is. And we'll talk about how to adapt this pattern for that purpose. I'm sorry if we're having a little bit of audio or video trouble. It turns out that my internet connection is kind of unstable, and so I've been playing around with getting that stable. So back to the Garter Gusset Tea. Today is July 6th, 7th. I lose track since I'm not actually in the office. Today is July 7th. And first of all, let's look at the sizing. The sizes are small through 3X large. Don't use the sizing to figure out what size you're going to make. Look at the finished bust measurement. We have 37 to 51 inches. Measure your full bust and circle the size. That is a couple of inches larger than your measurement. What I'd like you to do is go look at the pattern on page 4. It's the schematic. Let's look at the schematic. What I want you to notice is that the shape of this is like this. So it's an A shape garment. The finished chest size is at the underarm measurement. So there is where it will be 37 to 51 inches. It starts down at the bottom. You'll see the circumference with the arrows, 42.5 to 56.5 inches. So from your underarm measurement, so from here to here, is going to be 8 to 10.5 inches. And then from there down is 10 inches. So measure where that is, where it falls on your body. At that 10 inches, do you have enough width to fit into the size that you have chosen for your chest measurement? So I'm more of a pear-shaped. I need more width at the bottom in order for it not to cling to my thighs. So, so I'm going to be adding width at the bottom, and then I'm going to angle up to my bust measurement. So I'm going to have to do some adjustments to the pattern no matter what. They have the measurement for the half body width here, 18.5 to 25.5 inches. So that's your underarm to underarm. And let's go back over to page 1 of the pattern where it says your gauge. So your gauge is not the same as the gauge. The gauge in the pattern is not the same as the gauge that's on the ball band. Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure what my computer is doing. Let me pause the recording a moment. I'm back. I had the other computer I was trying to connect with. It's trying to take over hosting. Okay, so where I had left off was talking about gauge. So we are on the main page of the pattern where it says sizes, finished measurements, materials, and down we're now at the gauges section. So the row gauge, 20 stitches and 32 rows equals 4 inches over pattern stitch with garter stitch gussets using large needle. So the interesting thing is they don't have anything called garter stitch gussets pattern. The pattern stitch over on the right hand side under stitches techniques used. Pattern stitch worked in rounds, pattern stitch worked in rows. So that's what they mean. The pattern stitch worked in rounds. 8 rounds is going to be, well, you're going to have to work, let me start over. You're going to have to do a couple of gauge swatches. You can, if you know you knit loose or you knit tight, then adjust your needle size accordingly. So what I would do to get started is I would cast on, this is hand knitting. I'm going to be a little lax about my gauge because this is a loose flowing garment. So as long as my gauge is just close, real close. It has to be real close. It can't be too far off. But as long as my gauge is 20 stitches and 32 rows, I'm going to be happy with that. What I would typically do is cast on 40 stitches, and I would work 40 stitches by 40 rows, and then treat my swatch like I'm going to treat the garment. So if I'm going to soak it in the washer, I don't ever use hand wash on the washer. I either hand wash in person or I soak in the washer, turn it to spin out the water, and lay flat to dry. That's typically what I do. So I'm going to cast on 40 stitches, and I'm going to work the pattern stitch using larger needles. So the larger needles is a size 7, and the pattern stitch I'm going to do is pattern stitch worked in rows, which is stockinette stitch for 6 rows and then garter stitch for 2 rows. So, and note there too that you're going to use 2 balls, and that's so that you get the distinct color change between the stockinette stitch and the garter stitch. That's what really appealed to me when I looked at this yarn, is that distinct color change. That's the ridge that stands out every 8 rows. So if you want to be chintzy, you could do 20 stitches and 32 rows, but I recommend that you go a little bit larger than that. And then the second, so with garter stitch gussets, and garter stitch gussets they don't explain that to you in the abbreviations or in the glossary. The garter stitch gussets are knit every row, stockinette stitches, knit 1 row, purl 1 row. So the garter stitch gussets are, and that's where we flip to page 2 of the pattern. So when it says begin stitch pattern, set up round, purl 24 or 28, place marker, knit 82 to 131, place marker, purl 24 to 28. So your garter stitch gussets on either side of at your side seams are going to be 14 stitches on each, the front and the back, left and the right. So 14 stitches at the cast on edge. So if you did, and after you do you're going to decrease within the gusset. So you're going to go down to 12 stitches at the gusset at the underarm. So that gusset is going to be the decrease for the A-line within the gusset itself, not outside of the gusset. So that's going to be another slimming factor in looking at the garment, because it's going to go from wider at the bottom to narrower at the underarm. So I would do 6 stitches each side on your swatch in garter stitch, and then the garter stitch ridge on the 8th row, 7th and 8th row. So I'll address this with the machine knitters separately, but okay, back to the stitch pattern. So the gauge swatch. So you're going to do 2 sets of gauge swatches, like 4 inches with the garter gusset and 4 inches without the garter gusset. And then treat your swatch as if it were your garment, and then measure and see how close you are to 20 stitches in 32 rows. And with hand knitting, you can typically stretch up and it scrunches in, so you will get more stitches, like 22 or 23 per 4 inches. And you can stretch it this way and get 18 or 19. So we're knitting this fairly loosely. It's not see-through, but it's loose, and you'll have a lot of give. What you want to do is give it more length, pulling it down, because as the garment hangs on the body, it's going to stretch. The silk is going to give it some stretch. So when it stretches down, it's going to shrink in. And just remember that. So as you wear it throughout the day, it's going to stretch a little bit, and they call that the hang. So keep that in mind when you measure your gauge in order to get it to fit. You don't want your armhole to hang down to 12 inches. You want your armhole to be at 10 after the hang. So, or at 10 for me, because I have a deep, I have a big arm, so I use a 10-inch armhole. Let's see, what else can we talk about? So that's your first step. And I think I'll leave it at that. You need a gauge swatch. You need to know that your garment's going to fit your body shape, and post in Porch Talk and ask your questions. Tell me what your gauge swatch is, what needle size you knitted on, what the measurement was before and after, treating it. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about, you know, getting casted on and what cast on method to use, and all of those details that get you right into the knitting. Okay, so I am going to stop this video and come back and talk to the machine knitters about how we're going to proceed with machine knitting.